Hello, welcome everyone. Welcome to an all-new Process Mining Café. Today we are talking about measures and targets. And for this topic, Rudy and we are joined by two guests, Jan van Mol. Jan is Head of Quality Assurance at Philips Healthcare, and his colleague, Muthu Varatarajulu, Master Black Belt and Senior Quality Manager also at Philips Healthcare. Hello Muthu, hello Jan, welcome.
Hello.
Hello, thank you.
Hello to everyone.
Thanks a lot for joining us. We will dive into the topic right away. But before that, we have two small housekeeping notes. First of all, I want to remind you that you can all talk to us while we're on the air. So you can join the chat just on this website below this video. Just enter your name. You don't need a password or anything. And then, you can join us there. We will keep an eye on the chat and bring in your questions throughout the session. And the other thing I wanted to let you know is that due to popular demand, we have actually now a version of the Process Mining Café as a podcast. So some of you have told us that they like to listen to the café and they like to listen to podcasts in general. So there's of course a lot of convenience to having a good podcast player, and so we also offer the café now in all the popular platforms. There will be an announcement for that on the blog soon, so you'll see that also on the mailing list, and we will share the links. But basically, if you just search for Process Mining Café, you will find it there. And let us know how that works for you. Let us know if any platform is missing. So even more ways to listen to, in this case, the Process Mining Café. Now, at the Process Mining Café, we are always talking about any specific topic. And of course, a process mining topic, but it's always related to a specific application area or a specific use case or role. And today it's a little bit of both. We are on the one hand side, Jan and Muthu, you're coming from the whole quality assurance area in a manufacturing company. So that is a certain context, and we will talk about that. But we will also talk about process mining and statistics and how that can be combined. And in fact, we have a very concrete example that Rudy and I will share based on an approach that Muthu and Jan have developed that we think will be very useful for many of you out there who are using process mining if you want to go a step deeper. So we will come to that a little bit in a moment. Now, to get started with this whole topic, Jan, maybe we can start with you, and you can tell us a little bit more about why you did start using process mining in the beginning.
Yes, and indeed I can elaborate on that. So as you already referred to in the beginning while opening this session, both Muthu and me work for Philips. We are working for a medical device company. We are in a heavily regulated industry. And basically the starting point for us in everything we do is safety and quality. So that's basically the essence of everything we do inside of the company. And to allow us to do so, we obviously have a quality management system to ensure that. And actually the quality management system was one of the starting points for us to start looking into process mining. So just to give a high level overview for those who are not really into the details here, we have a quality management system that consists out of, let's say, around 20 key processes that govern how we work. And these processes every day generate a lot of data. It's data that we keep in our electronic systems. And just to give you an impression, think about complaint handling. So from time to time we get a complaint coming out from the market. That complaint is being handled by our teams. And obviously that complaint becomes an electronic record. So that's just to give an impression of the type of data I'm referring to. And of course we do analysis on that data. We have always been doing so. With process mining, we actually saw that it enabled us to look actually below the hood. So look deeper into the processes we are using. Because we get more insight, for instance, into how processes are actually being executed. We get a better understanding with process mining also on how actually the process has been performed. based on historical data. So looking at flows of records, for instance, looking at the different variants that process mining gives us insight to, and that also allows us to give to have different ways, for instance, of doing compliance checks. So again, just to give you an impression of that, process mining, as the audience probably is very aware of, gives you an overview of all the variants within the process. Well, some of those variants might, for instance, be not fully according to the defined process that we want to use. So that immediately would flag paths that were taken through a given process that actually would need a correction, for instance. So there were numerous reasons why we actually wanted to have process mining being used as a pilot on top of the quality management system.
Yeah, that's really great. I'm curious for the quality processes that you mentioned. You mentioned complaint handling process. Can you give some other examples for the people who are not so familiar with that area? Because it's not so much the production process itself, but it's more the processes around it. Would that be correct?
Yeah, indeed. So basically, a quality management system is holding all the processes that a company needs in order to manufacture and design and eventually market and service their products. That's also holds for us as a medical device company. With several differences, like in our case, what I already mentioned in the beginning, we are in a highly regulated business. So the quality management system also ensures that we are meeting all the directives, standards and laws that exist around the globe. In our case, related to medical devices, obviously, but it also holds processes in addition how we want to operate as a business. So it's a hybrid between business initiated processes and quality initiated processes. But it goes end to end. So we have processes around how we do design, how we do manufacturing, how we do service, etc., etc.
Yeah. So to add to Jan's point, actually, there are even the business critical projects like Lean or Kaizen, where process mining will be very handy in going through the entire data. The one beauty of process mining is that we are not sampling, that we are not picking few points to check whether the improvement is significant or not. So we are taking the entire data. So entire data goes through the process mining at a click of a button, and it gives the report whether the improvement is significant or not. So not only quality, but it can be used for anywhere, as Jan was mentioning, whether it is in design. Even for design, for example, the design changes when we make it, that is also a process. Is that process working well? For that also we applied process mining, and it gave us a lot of points. And the lean manufacturing in every aspect, as long as we have the data with a date stamp or a time stamp, this can be efficiently used, and that's our view, our experience. Yeah.
And Jan, your team operates as a central team, right? So across these different processes. So does that mean that it's kind of you govern the quality of these processes, or is the quality of these processes governed by the team who executes this process?
Yeah, now obviously Philips, being a very big international company, has many people working for quality as such. So it's a wide spectrum of people who are involved in both governing and operating the quality management system. So that would definitely not be me in person, definitely not. But it's a distributed governance, so to speak. So typically Philips currently consisting out of several sub-businesses, let me call it like that. They each have their own quality function, who actually is in charge of managing their quality systems. So it depends on the entity you are talking about. The view we have, if you would refer back to process mining again, process mining to us was a pilot where we actually looked into, and that pilot started about 2 years ago already, we looked into the power of process mining and how it could help us in augmenting the insights we have into the data that is going around in those quality management systems. That's how we should perceive quality mining within our context.
Yeah, Great. Can you? And you have applied process mining in different processes there, right?
Yeah. So to give an impression of the processes, we have used it again as a pilot for instance, what we call defect management, complaint handling. We also looked at a process called KPI, which is an acronym for corrective action, preventive action. Those are known to be highly, let me call it, data-intensive processes. That actually, process mining gave us a lot of insight in how these processes actually perform. To be very clear on that, those processes already were compliant to all the regulations we need to adhere to, but process mining is giving additional insights, for instance, into how efficient those processes are in terms of lead time, for instance, and also how variants actually perform within one given process. So to us, it was really what I quickly referred to in the beginning, looking under the hood of a certain process, getting more insight based on the data analysis that process mining gives us.
Yeah. And so one of the words in the title, right? It's called Measures and Targets, today's session. So one of the words is targets. So that's also one of the things I wanted to talk about. So where does the target come from? Is that the target that's coming from these outside regulations that you mentioned, or are these targets developed internally?
Yeah, so targets tends to be a little bit of overloaded term. So it depends on the company you are in, how a target is being, first of all, perceived, and also how it is being set. In our case, you should think of indeed certain directives require us to meet certain timelines. I don't want to go into the details exactly, but there are regulatory bound timelines present actually in the current directives we have globally. So we definitely need to meet those, given the fact that we are in that heavily regulated medical device domain. In addition, there could be targets set by a business, for instance, on lead times, not necessarily from a regulatory perspective, but driven by actually business targets. So both types of targets exist. Where they come from depends mainly on the distinction between regulatory initiated or regulatory grounded targets or business grounded targets. Sometimes it's also referred to as KPIs, and also to elaborate further on where process mining can make a difference. Think about having a KPI on lead time, for instance. You can have a KPI that measures lead time of a certain process. Let's say something needs to be completed within 15 working days. Now, that's definitely something you can measure, where you don't need process mining for, and you can do that in Excel. But if you want to have more knowledge about how exactly the current process is performing, the KPI as such doesn't hold enough information. So it could be, for instance, a situation that you are just meeting the 15 days on that target, but you are very close to the border of not meeting that target. And that's something you not necessarily can conclude from doing normal KPI measurement and management, but process mining gives you that additional detail. And that's also what we learned in the pilot we did.
Yeah, actually we had two major advantages using process mining. One is like, as Jan was mentioning, but is it like is the process compliant to the defined process? Certain variants, if they are deviating from it, which will be thrown to us. And also there is, as was discussed, like KPIs. They keep performance indicators. So we have the targets. It can be a regulatory-based KPI. For example, the time to complete a complaint, to close a complaint. That is one example. The other one is like a lean manufacturing, when we work on the cycle time or the lead time to complete a part or a manufacturing or a system kind of a thing. That also can be applied, where the process mining will help us whether is our product our process predictable in meeting the such goals. So these are two aspects. One is the goal met or not? Other one is the process compliant or not?
Yeah.
In both aspects, yeah.
Right. Now that's really interesting. So what you have described here is that based on the target, which already exists, right, either through outside, for example, regulatory requirements or internal business targets, you can then use process mining to get a more detailed insight into the actual process flow, into the variations for understanding the nature of the process, to be able to manage it better, but also to see compliance deviations. I think what is also interesting, the other way around, right? Really, sometimes we see that companies are maybe not having such a clear view yet on what their targets are. What should their ambition be? And that then process mining helps them to maybe get a sense of what would be actually a good target as an ambition, right? To set the target in the first place. I think that's kind of reverse.
Yeah.
So that's
actually.
Also,
So there actually what we can do also, I understand certain processes are not very critical, but they want to analyze that also. So in those cases, they can do a process mining and see what is the min max, most likely all the duration. I'm talking about from the time wise, and then set a ambitious target, like every year 20% or 15% kind of a thing, like to improve the efficiency of the process. If there is no KPI that is driven from the business or from the regulatory point of view, and they can have an internal target to continuously improve the process. That's my view.
And it shouldn't be too ambitious, right? But realistic. So it's
absolutely correct.
There are actually, what I see in practice, often there are a couple of challenges, right? So if we are talking about KPIs and setting targets, or even being able to measure, right? So that could also be a challenge. Then, of course, the first thing is, if we define kind of a target, is this something we defined internally, or has it a specific goal, right? So is it driven by kind of a customer demand, or something we agree, or something we have promised the customer as part of the fulfillment, for example?
Yeah.
And if we start measuring it, then kind of the discussion is how should we measure it, right? So is it kind of as is delivered, right? So as we say, it's actuals. So if we take the data, we do a process mining analysis, and we would say, this is how we have delivered it last month. Or is it something kind of what we promise in general, right? So then it's more statistically driven. That's what kind of we are discussing about. And that's often what I see also as a difference between what we say as a KPI, where we often report out to, right, the percentage of cases that have fulfilled the demand, versus the capability of the process, what we are kind of discussing today, right? So if we are talking about capability, then we are talking about the capability of the process in general. And this is kind of a little bit more challenging way to measure the process. But even before to get there, and that's kind of what I see in practice. So if we start with a value stream mapping or a process discovery, right? If we are using process mining, then often the first question is even how to define what we want to measure, right? So if we have a clear outcome, what Jan already mentioned, we have a clear KPI, we want to measure it, then we can start measuring it. And then you can also argue, do we need process mining for that? Or do we?
Yes.
But I think there are two key things, right? So if we don't know how to measure it, then process mining can be a very great tool in order to simplify the way how to measure it. So how many times I have seen that people say, I can create a query out of this, and then within a few hours it becomes so complicated that you cannot deal with this complexity and make the business decisions to make a good measurement. And the second thing is, if you are able to measure it, then it's independent of how it's being executed, right? So if we want to know what's kind of the reason why we are not being able to make it, or now we are kind of in check and the process capability is okay, but maybe in the future the process drifts and then changes, then we cannot see it anymore. So then the process mining area.
That's correct, really. And maybe to add to that, one of the advantage we have experienced, and again, I think that would hold for the regulated industries in general, so not only medical device, is that we have an obligation, and that's typically an obligation in a regulated industry, to do internal auditing on processes. So to spot any incompliant issues, for instance, or to look at improvements of your current processes. Now, traditionally, companies tend to do that based on sampling. So you have a huge amount of data, and for an internal audit, typically you use manual sampling even to look at the quality and the performance of a process. Now, the advantage of process mining clearly stood out in our case, where for process mining, as long as you have the data in your electronic systems, which we do in Philips, you can feed 100% of the data. So we call that record coverage. So 100% of the records, a record is something, it's a piece of data in your quality management system. You can achieve 100% coverage by doing process mining. And that's something we learned is simply not feasible if you want to achieve the same thing manually by sampling. You can then, for instance, time-wise, only take 10 or 20% of your records if you do it manually. And that really is, first of all, not only a gain in coverage, but also time-wise. So what Muthu quickly mentioned already, we use Kaizens, for instance, to dive into situations that we want to improve. In order to prepare a Kaizen, we had a very big reduction of analysis time upfront to analyze the data before going into a Kaizen event. And that really went up to a ratio of 1 to 10. So normally where you would need 10 working days to analyze something, we could do it in 1 day based on process mining.
Yeah. These are two really great examples for what process mining can add. So this full coverage from an audit perspective, that's really very important. I think this higher assurance is like one of the big benefits. But also, yeah, I think that's, I really like that you bring the example of being faster, because yeah, I mean, you have limited resources that you have to work with, right? So you have to make the most of it. So if you can be more efficient, have maybe more projects, or can be quicker, get started with the actual why are we doing it this way, rather than spending a lot of time preparing and understanding the situation in the first place, that yeah, then you can go deeper in the analysis and actually make the improvements.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But maybe to, yeah, so now we have talked about process mining and what it adds to just looking at targets and KPIs and measuring KPIs. But actually you went further, right? You applied process mining on those processes. And I think there are many examples that we don't even have the time here today to go into detail, like where you applied this. But what we wanted to talk about here today also is that you went a step further and you brought in your statistical background to basically enrich the process mining analysis, also with more of a statistical component. And that is not just to measure how something is today, but how it's more in general, or maybe in the future, right?
Yes.
So do you want to maybe talk a little bit about that first in generally, and then we can look at the example that we have on the slide?
Yes, actually the statistics can help a lot in predicting what can happen next based on what has happened in the past. So in this case, there are many techniques that we can use it. We have used quite a lot of techniques, but of which I can say CPK, the Process Capability Index, was very handy in analyzing the health of the process. What is the differentiator is that, for example, I have a goal, and I have taken 10 cases. All the 10 cases met the goal, but very close to the goal, for example. Assuming that my target is about 10 days and everything were, go ahead.
So for that, let's look at the example, because that's exactly the example that we have, right? So to make, because we realize not everyone who's watching, many of you have a process mining background, and while some of you are maybe Lean Six Sigma black belts yourself, not everyone is. So to make sure everyone understands these statistical aspects that we're talking about, we made an example that you can and that you can see on the slide here that I'm bringing up. So basically that's the example that we can talk through now, right, Muthu?
Yes. You can go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, no, please, you can use that. So there are 6 different measurements.
Yes.
The target is 10, right? So USL means upper limit, or what does that stand for?
Upper specification limit.
Yes.
The goal is that all the thing has to go within 10 days, for example, in this case. So there was one which was completed in 9.5 days and 9 days and so on, kind of a thing. That's how it came in. And if you just make it like a pass kind of a thing, everything met. Yes, 9.5 is less than 10, it is pass, it is met. So like that, if I say all the cases have met, that means I have 100% of the time it is meeting. So I can say that I'm very happy with that, kind of a thing. But am I really happy? Should I be really happy? That is what these statistics will tell us. So if you see the mean is nothing but the average value of all the time taken and the standard deviation across all the data that you have it. Standard deviation is nothing but it is a measure of variation. So the more, if you want your process to be very predictable, you want the standard deviation to be as less as possible. So how much less, that we will not know right now by just seeing the number, but the CPK will tell. So there is a specification. We have a mean and standard deviation that is coming from the process, and we have a CPK. CPK will tell us whether the process is healthy or not. So the formula is just given very simply, like upper specification minus mean divided by 3 times standard deviation. So when you put
and Muthu, CPK stands for capability, or does it stand for something else?
It's a capability index.
Okay,
process capability index, and there are multiple things. There are at least only 2 of them. One is CPK, another one is PPK. CPK stands for process capability index for the sample data, and whereas PPK is for population data, which is nothing but a large volume of data. But here, typically, when at any point in time, we will have only the sample data. That's why we are using CPK is a good metric, right metric to use with. And the CPK will tell, for example, in this case, when we put in all the very simple thing, how much is the average time, how much is the variation that is happening, and what is my target. With these 3 information, if I measure, it's coming to 0.73. Is 0.73 good enough? I don't know. So you can see the table on the lower right-hand corner. So which says higher the better. For example, when we talk about a 6 sigma process, the CPK is around 2. That is an excellent process. So then we have a very good process that is 1.67, 1.33, and less than 1 is considered as a very poor process. That means very unpredictable process. So now you can see it is coming to 0.73, which is lower than 1. That means the process is not very predictable. And forget about the statistics for a minute. If you see the data as is, all the data points are very close to the target. And it also has a variation. That means tomorrow, when we use a new case, it may fall beyond the goal. It can, right? That is what the statistics clearly says. And for this, what we have to do, we have to keep our average to further away from the specification, and we have to keep the standard deviation as low as possible so that they will not jump out of the goal. So
exactly.
These are the 2 things. So if you just measure the percentage of pass, 100% of the thing has passed. But that 100% is not true 100% if you apply this technique. And it is very real, actually. You can see it that way.
Yes. Yeah. And we made a second example to explain a little bit more this kind of aspect, right? The statistical aspect, because there's another example which also has 6 measurements, and all of these 6 measurements also are below the target, right? Remember, the target here is 10, and like in the example number 1, all of the 6 measurements are actually below the target. So if you would just measure them, you would say 100% met the target. But to further describe the actual capability of meeting this target also in the future, you look at, like Muthu said, the average, but also the deviation and the distribution. In this second example, right, we have actually a good example, a better example, which has a similar mean. So also these 6 values have a mean of around 8.8, but they are less distributed. You see it at the top in the timeline. They are more closer together. And for that reason, it's more predictable, you could say, and we can be more we have a higher chance that also in the future this target would be met.
Anna, second example is not shown right now.
Oh, it's not shown? Let's go to the second example. Can we see that?
Now we can see it. Yes. Yes.
Okay, thank you for that. Yes. So here you can see the second example on the right. Again, there are 6 values. They are 8.7, 8.9, 8.6. It's like measuring 6 times, right? And it's always below the target of 10. So, and even around the same mean. So the mean is 8.8. But then, because the standard deviation is much smaller, we get a higher CPK value. And then looking in the table that you made, it's above 2. Actually, it's better than better than Six Sigma, right?
That's correct. Better than Six Sigma, and it's an excellent process, a best-in-class process. That means it is highly predictable. That means you can say that your next case will most likely be less than 10.
Right. Yeah. And well, this is like one of the many tools and concepts from statistics that can be used, right? And of course, Six Sigma experts often have a lot of these tools in their toolbox. But what we wanted to show today is take this approach that you, Muthu and Jan, you have developed, where you extended your cross-mining analysis with this kind of statistical dimension. And Rudy and I, right, we want to show you an example from a process mining perspective that shows how that integrates it. So should we start with the example, Rudy?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and what we also can do, so if the previous example is a little bit too quick, or if people are not in the context of Lean Six Sigma, so we can include a link towards specifically the technique of applying the CPK, so that you can read a little bit more background on it if you want.
Absolutely, that's a good point. So when we publish the recording in 2 or 3 weeks, usually we publish the recording, and you can follow it on the blog or find it online. So we will share along with the recording the documentation of the approach and further pointers, so you can learn more about it and also step by step actually follow exactly what we did, because we will also share the templates and the documentation for that. So we start with an example, right? So Rudy, you can talk us through the example, which is from a credit application process. I'm opening the file here. So now in Disco we open the log file. We have a case ID, timestamp, right? An activity name.
Yeah, so the case ID is a request number. The timestamp is kind of the moment at which the status is changing, or when it's coming into a working bin. And the activity is the working bin itself. And a working bin is kind of a status that is maintained by a particular team where they take out work as part of the workflow.
So this is like a loan application process, correct, Rudy? Yeah. Okay, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. So this is a loan application process. So it's about personal loans even. And the whole process can be started in 2 ways. So you can do an online loan application. So you can see it at the top. So there are 22,000 requests coming in this online channel. And there is a dotted line kind of bypassing the online channel, going directly into lead. Yeah, that's that one. And that means there's also another channel. There's a phone channel. So people can request a loan by directly contacting this bank. So we have online, we have lead. And then from the lead, most cases go to qualified lead. It's kind of an intermediate stage where also from this online channel, they contact the customer to have a conversation. So one of the important things is to know whether or not people are eligible for the loan before they actually provide them an offer, right? So what's the loan request in relation to their income, for example, and how are we able to reduce the risk as much as possible? The next step, if that's qualified, then they make an offer. And the offer contains of an offer package, including the contract and all the information that is needed for the customer to sign the contract and provide all the documents required for underwriting. And these documents are sent by post to the credit team. So you see the next step is the credit approval. And as part of the credit team, they start the underwriting, and the outcome can be three things. So either the loan request is rejected, so that's on the left side at the bottom. The loan request is complete or approved, so that means the contract is ready to be booked. The booking itself is done in another system, not in this workflow system, but complete means that the booking will start. Or they don't have enough information to make the decision yet, and then it becomes incomplete. So we have an intermediate incomplete stage in the middle. And then that means that they request additional information directly from the customer again, and then the credit approval process continues. And eventually it's possible that they are either not being able to reach the customer, or the customer decides to take the business elsewhere. So that means the whole request is cancelled on the right side. So on the left side it's rejected, so that means they decide not to put the loans in the books because there's too much risk. On the right side is that they eventually, the customer kind of decides not to have this loan.
Yeah. Exactly. And well, talking about targets, right? So this is a process that actually involves different business units. So often, if there's kind of an overall target for this process, it's broken down into smaller targets that we can then analyze with process mining, right? I think that's a nice thing that we can show here with this.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is that there was actually, and initially, before they actually started to further analyze this process, there was kind of a metric about this process, and then they would say, it takes on average, it was an average, it takes on average 10 days to get this loan through. And then it was kind of the first question is, what does that mean, right? So if you look at the process, what does that mean? It doesn't say anything, right? So if you look at the process again, then there is a big part where the customer is being involved, right? So after making the offer, and so when the offer is being made and before these documents are being returned, it can take time. So it takes the customer time to decide. And for some customers, it takes 1 day. For other customers, it takes 10 days or maybe even longer, right? So it depends a little bit on their demand and how quickly they actually need the loan. So then the argument was, should we break up the process into more parts? And often if you look at the lean part or the Six Sigma part, it's done by having kind of a CPOC. And CPOC kind of defines what's kind of the input, the part of the process, and then the output, and then it's driven from customer to customer. And in this case, there are actually two processes, right? So it's from request till offer. And so the customer is requesting an offer, and then he can make a decision. And then from the offer, they return the contract. So it is from contract till the booking or the rejection of course.
So it's actually from credit approval, right? That's the second half of the process. And so that's what we will focus on in this scenario. And there's a target for that as well that should be met just for this part, kind of the underwriting piece.
So in this particular process, they make a promise. So it's a public promise on the website. So if you return us the documents, then you have a decision about the loan. So it's either approved or rejected within 3 working days. So that was the promise.
Yeah. Okay. And so now with process mining, we can actually analyze this target, right, based on this promise. And to do that, first we need to focus on this part of the process. So we can do this by a filter. So we add in this case, an endpoints filter here where we say, okay, we start basically taking a pair of scissors and chopping off everything. I think credit approval, right, is the first step of the underwriting.
Yeah, so it starts with the first occurrence of credit approval. So that's kind of the definition here. And it's either complete, so the contract will be booked, or rejected. And then the argument is, so if you leave in cancelled, you can see that there are still some cancelled cases in there, right? So it can happen that they are not able to reach the customer when they demand additional information, and then eventually becomes cancelled, but there's no promise about these cancellations. Yeah. So if we look at the promise, then it's only complete or rejected.
So now we have cut out this part of the process where we can actually look at the goals, like with respect to the goal at the case durations, and we see that the median is 3 days and the mean is 4.4 days. But actually, this is calendar days, right? Per default, we're looking at calendar days, and the promise is in business days. So we can briefly adjust that to make our measurements in business days using the time warp. functionality. So for that, we will say, well, let's focus only on business days, and that's only Monday through Friday. On the weekends, the underwriting team doesn't work. And also, if we look at holidays, we should exclude those. So let's pick the Netherlands for that. And yeah, so we say business days underwriting. Yeah. And so, yeah, so now we have the measurements correct, right, for what we want to see, and we can see some of them, still longer, like than three business days. But we can now do this process mining analysis, and exactly what we have discussed before. We can actually look at the actual flow of the process. We see that there's a lot of incompletes, right, that are going on. So what would be, for example, a reason why could this be incomplete? Rudy?
Yeah, so of course, if you look at the full process, there is the step where they provide an offer, right? So an offer is contained of an offer package, and it includes the requirement of the documents that need to be provided. And it can be based upon the situation, right? So if someone has a pension, then of course this pension is kind of the basis for the income. If someone has a job, then of course the income is part of that. So they request kind of the documents that are needed in order to support the underwriting. And in some cases, these documents are not provided, or the contract is sent back without the signature, or these documents are provided but not fulfilling the requirements. So for example, if you look at bank statements, these bank statements cannot be older than 3 months. And if they are older than 3 months, they are not good enough in order to do the underwriting. So they need to request newer bank statements. And right. These are there are a lot of different scenarios, of course, but these are these need to be analyzed in order to determine what's the biggest root cause here for these incomplete cases.
Yeah, and we can look at the process map, right? But also, brings us a little bit back to the scenarios, Muthu, that you were describing. So you were looking at the processes, the variations in your processes, but also working with the variance, right? So the variance can be a really powerful way to look at the different variations actually that the process goes through. So and so we can see the different ways the process can go through from the beginning to the end. So we see a lot of the variants. Actually, variant 1 is already one where we have this incomplete, at least one, and some of the other variants have incomplete even multiple times. But variant 2, for example, would be the good process, right? Ideally, the underwriting team checks the documents and then awards the loan, so it's successfully completed. We can see this here with variant 2. So one thing we could do is to say, well, let's just look at, for variant 2, how are we meeting the target of 3 business days, right? So we could, for example, filter variant 2 here, and let's just focus on variant 2 for a moment, and then once we do that, we can measure, for example, and that's of course how we can measure with process mining kind of targets, by measuring, for example, a performance target in the performance filter. And then we could, for example, say, well, the 3 business days, we are still with business days here. And then we can say, not hours, but days. 3 days, exactly. And then once we apply that, variant 2, less than 3 business days. And then it looks actually very good, because then we can see 93% of all the cases in this variant are meeting our target. But now we're coming back to your discussion, right, Muthu, where you say, well, this is true for those samples, but what does it say about the future, right?
Correct. Yes. So how the process is going to be healthy? Is it healthy, kind of a thing? So that is what we are going to see now. Yeah, it's a good, interesting point. Yes. Yeah.
And so basically the approach that you have developed, and which we are demonstrating now based on your template is that you start with the variance. So we go back, not just looking at variant 2, but we are looking at all of the variants.
Yeah.
But for this specific subset of the process, which we are analyzing now with respect to this target of 3 business days.
Yes.
Then in Disco... Yeah?
Statistics, and then extract the cases and the variance, the data.
Exactly. So here in the statistics tab, you have the case statistics, where we can see all the different statistics. We can sort, we can see what the longest cases are, for example, and also for the variance. We see these overview information about these variants that we can look at in detail, right? Here we can see, of course, different examples for these variants, but in the statistics we see the overview information about them. And from Disco, everything can be exported. So you made use of that and you exported first the variance here. Through right-click, we can say export CSV, so we can say variance business days. So I just exported on the desktop here now. And I do the same, right-click, export to CSV. For the cases. And now we can actually go to the, go out of this presentation here, and we go into the template that you've developed. And the template, and we will share that with you, like we said afterwards, with all the pointers. It has 3 tabs. So the summary tab is where we will see the results in a moment, but there's 2 tabs that need to be filled, and this is the variance and the cases tab, and this is where we will basically just paste the information from the statistics that we just exported. So let me open the files that I just exported. We start with the variance. So if I open the variance statistics in Excel, then what we do is we just copy the values here. Just copy, and then we go to the variance tab. And what is important and is also mentioned here in the template at the top is that you right click and then you say paste special values. So we are just pasting the values from the exported statistics. And so that's the first piece that we need to enter into the template. And then for cases, we do the same thing. We open the cases in Excel. And now we select all of the values from the cases, statistics export, and again through right click, paste special values. We are pasting them into the second tab for the template. And now we are saving this. And now we go to the summary tab. And here at the top, we need to fill in the target, right? And we had this target of 3 business days. So we can type 3. So it's in days. The target is in days. And then actually, you see the CPK is being calculated here automatically for all these different variants. And we also see the traffic lights, and it doesn't look too good, right? Really, we saw that.
So the summary tab is automatically populated, right, Muthu?
Yes, the summary is automatically populated, other than the top row where we can provide how many cases we have to include for the statistics and what is the specification limit, upper specification limit. Because typically this is a time-based, so usually only the upper specification is valid, not the lower specification. If it is done in 0 day, it is good for us.
Exactly. And one thing that we see here is that actually, maybe 3 days is too ambitious, right? Could that be the conclusion, really, if we are looking at this?
So if you look at the CPK, and if you remind the values which should be there, right? So it should be above 1 minimum, kind of, right, Muthu?
Yeah, actually, variant 2 was talking about 93% means meeting it. So, what is the percentage right now? I couldn't see it there. Here, it's about.
Yeah, we can make it a little bit bigger, perhaps. Let me make it bigger like this.
1.85.
But it's 36, so that's 36, a good point. Huh? So if we go back to Disco, actually, we can still see it here. If we go to variant 2. Then we see 93% was if we are actually measuring for all of the cases, and it's a lot of cases. It's 1,700 cases, 1,745. But 93%, that's just this measurement. If we are talking more generally, statistically, it's a much lower percentage. Right?
So it talks about the predictability. That means there is a likelihood of only 30 5% or something like that, that in future we will be able to meet this goal. That's what it is. And there are two ways to look at it. Right now, the CPKs are very, very low, very poor, less than 1 in all the cases. So it is red now. Either we go back and then see what is the bottleneck, why it is happening, find out the root cause and try to fix the process to increase the health of the process. Other way is like, okay, so this is the best possible. That means, for example, entitlement. This process will work only this big, this best. So with this, what do? That time we can go back and then change the specification after confirming with this customer. For example, this is the customer, right? The person who is applying for the loan is the customer to the bank. And is it acceptable? For example, we may have 3 days and then we may make it to 7 days. But if the competitive company or a bank is giving at 4 days kind of a thing, then we will lose it out. So that is how the trade-off that we have to make to arrive at the right goal.
We can change the goal, right? That's one of the things. So for example, if we say 3 days is too ambitious, let's make this 7 days. We can do it in the template here. Then we will see that actually 2 of the variants are turning green and yellow. Correct. So they are more capable. But overall, I think, what we see is that it's very strict, right? So really I think for service processes, we do see more variations. So that's maybe also something that people need to keep in mind if they want to apply statistical concepts like CPK in their service processes, that, maybe that's something they
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you go to, for example, Hemente, some of the processes, I've seen it. Some process will get very quick, and some processes, if it is taking a lot of time, it is unpredictable. It makes us nervous, like what is happening and so on kind of a thing. That's where the variation, if it is reduced, the customer will be very, very happy than having an average target.
Maybe to reflect on those examples that we just saw, and maybe if that helps for the audience who do not have a statistical background or even a background in process mining. What you showed, Anna, in the beginning is a measurement, in this case coming out of process mining, of meeting the target in 93% of the cases. If you stop there, and that's where many companies also stop in terms of KPI management. They have a KPI measuring this, and the outcome would be in 93% of the cases we meet the target. And at the distance you would say, well, that's quite okay, right? 93%. Of course, it depends on the process you are looking at, but on average, I would say it's a nice outcome. But if you then go deeper, what we saw in the second half, you start looking under the hood of the process. You take a magnifying glass, you look into the details of the process, and you get more insight into how far are we from the target and how is the capability of that process. Then you get risk-related information of probability of not meeting the target in the future. And then it really depends on the process you are looking at. And Muthu, you already referred to that. You used the term risk. But what is the risk in general of not meeting that target? If there is no risk, then you can say, okay, we leave it like this. We shift the target a bit to the right, and many CPKs become green again. But if this is a critical process and you don't want to accept that risk, then you need to take further action into improving either one of these variants, getting more stable, whatsoever. And that's exactly the level of information I referred to in the beginning, what you normally would miss if you do traditional KPI management, quote unquote, and not using process mining. So this is exactly the additional insight given by process mining, combined with, in this case, statistics.
To reflect on this particular example, so as we can see here, of course, the promise is 3 business days, right? So that was kind of what was promised to the customer. And of course, what's kind of the risk of not meeting that, right? So you made a promise, then the customer will not be happy eventually. But I think the bigger risk here is kind of what your competition is doing, right? So if the competition takes 10 days and they all take 10 days, then there's no risk because you will be by far executing the process best in class compared to your competitors. But in this particular example, competitors are going to be online as well, right? So if you provide these kind of bank-based products or loan products online, people expect to have them immediate almost, right? So so then that means you should arrange this process in a completely different way. And then coming to the point, you need to take a look under the hood. The bottleneck will only be visible under the hood, right? So it will not be visible as part of the KPI. The KPI will only be able to give you an idea of how often you are not being able to make it, but where is kind of the pain point as part of the process.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe just to paint that picture complete, for the people in the audience who do have a Six Sigma background or a statistical background, they might recognize what I'm going to say now. What you often hear in industry is, we need a Six Sigma process. We want to be as predictable as possible, but that, again, depending on the risk, it's not always necessary to have a Six Sigma process, for the simple reason that having a Six Sigma process, so a highly capable and stable process, comes at a cost. That does cost a lot for a company on average to implement and maintain a Six Sigma process. So again, depending on the risk, companies need to decide wisely on where to put the limits here.
Yeah, I fully agree. But I think what we can learn from it, especially from a service type of industry, is that not only the outcome makes how good you are, right? So also the spread and the predictability. And I think they have a term in Lean Six Sigma, right? So it's kind of how precise you are, right? So hitting the target.
So the precise is a measure of standard deviation. Standard deviation is a measure of precise.
Yeah,
how precise that is. Go ahead, sorry.
And I think that's a big part of it, right? So how precise can you be? And so the capability is only not weighing in the outcome, but it weighs in how precise your process is. So if you make a mistake, how big the mistake would be, right? And so to give you an example in this particular case, if we are making maybe 99% of the cases within the 3 business days, and there's one which takes 60 days, right? Is it still a good process, or is it very poor, right? So.
It's what I really like about this example is exactly that combination of all the advantages of process mining that we already mentioned, but that it enriches us through this dimension of what you've just described, and this dimension of, for example, consistency and not just are we meeting it, but are we meeting it in a consistent manner, and having this kind of statistical dimension. And what you have done here, Muthu and Jan, is broken it down into kind of a very simple approach, which is based on the variance, which I think is really powerful, because the variance are a very good way to analyze a process from a process mining perspective. And we have this, what we've just seen based on the template, and everyone who's watching this right now, and once you receive the template, you can follow exactly the same steps, right? You can export the case statistics and the variance statistics from Disco, put them in the template, and then analyze your own variance in this way. And you also have then the possibility to go back again, right? So because once we see the variance here, for example, now with this new target of 7, if we're looking at the overview again, then we can still look maybe at some of the further variance further below. For example, variance 7 and variance 8 are both still, in terms of numbers, significant enough to look at them, like around 50-ish cases, but we can see the big difference between variance 7 and variance 8. So although both are poor in terms of the kind of the traffic light that we have here, one has a yield of 23% and the other one 0.2. So we could be curious, like, what's the difference between variance 7 and 8, right? And if we go back to the process again, not just here I was filtering for variance 2, but if we go back to all of them, we can look at variance 7 and variance 8, and then we see, okay, variance 7 is actually that was a poor one. We have a lot of actually incomplete, 1, 2, 3, 4 times we are going through this incomplete loop. So that explains why we are really not meeting that goal at all.
So for the context, they have to go back to the customer, request this additional information, and then getting information back, review the whole documents again, and then see, oh, we are still missing something, right? And need to go back to the customer again.
Right.
And every time it takes a couple of days before they actually get this information.
We can see that all of these are all cases that all follow this variant, right? So this precise path of taking these extra multiple loops through the process. And we can see it takes 32 days, for example, right? And it's business days. We're still kind of on the business day kind of lens here. But if we look at variant 3, at first it might seem like a good variant, right? Where we say, okay, this is actually maybe not focusing on the CPK, but more in comparison. It's a relatively good one, but actually if we then look at the process, it's one where it's being rejected. Now, that's maybe not the outcome that we want to optimize the process for, right? So usually you would want to maybe make an offer only for a customer who you can actually also then book the contract with. So that's not actually a good example that we want to propagate as our main scenario. So you have this dimension of the level of the variance, which are a way to look at the process. But then once you have this analysis, you can also go back again and like you mentioned with the targets in the beginning, in the first place, right? Have this kind of understanding again from what's under the hood, what's behind this variant actually.
Yes.
Yeah, and maybe in general, Anna, what we now are looking at indeed is the loan example, but if you zoom out again, what we have learned in doing the pre-analysis for our pilot within Philips is that if you would reach out to many companies in industry, there is always a strong desire to be very predictive when it comes to predictability of performance. So in the business process management domain, and I think many of you in the audience are aware of that, there have been several researches where the way of doing performance management and working with KPIs has been investigated. And until recently, and I could look up the article offline maybe, but the latest information I have seen is that still today many companies are using lagging indicators. So they have a quite strong way of doing performance management, but basically all the KPIs they use are lagging. Or the majority of them is lagging. And what we have seen here is that this at least opens up a route towards becoming more predictable. So it's one way of enabling a company to get more predictable rather than be looking at lagging indicators only. So that's again one of the, if you zoom out, it's one of the benefits of combining statistics in this case with process mining.
Yeah.
And if you are talking about lagging indicators, right? So that's kind of looking at the outcome of the process, right? And having kind of KPI for that, but then looking more on the indicators within the process that could be correlated or related to the outcome of the process, right? So to give you an example, lead time. So the specific example we look at here is should be within 3 business days, but if it becomes incomplete, does it correlate with the outcome of the process, right? So if it becomes incomplete, so if we're looking at the variants, right, and each of the variants which are bad, and if they are all have this pattern of becoming incomplete, and then there is a high correlation between incomplete and long-running cases, or these long-running variants, that it could be a predictor, a leading predictor of taking more time.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. No.
Yeah. It's very interesting. I also in the pre-discussion, Muthu, I remember that you mentioned that a CPK is, or this type of capability analysis is not used very often, right? Why is that the case?
Yeah, actually, it will tell the truth brutally, kind of a thing. So that could be one of the reason. Maybe, for example, a process need to be very, very consistent. Only then the capability will be in a good way. Otherwise, like whatever they do it actually. So by having more points, adding and things like that towards the goal, if the spread is too much, the CPK will show as a poor thing only. So it is very difficult. So maybe that could be like it shows the brutal truth of the process. So maybe that could be one of the reason that I'm thinking, right? Why it is not that commonly used. It is commonly used. It is used very much, but not as it could have been more. It could have been more. That's my view.
Yeah, that's interesting. And in a way, it brings back also brings us back to what you all discussed earlier, right? That the target also needs to be justified. So, and we saw this here, even for 93% for variant 2. Now on this kind of with the target 3, it's way below that, and even just around 40% possible yield. So, but it's very strict. Huh? So, and like Jan said before, maybe just having this goal just to be able to say, well, we are doing things Six Sigma. Yeah, that's maybe it needs to be justified to put this effort in there, because it is really difficult to achieve, to be so consistent all the time.
Absolutely. So it is driven by the market. Again, the competitor, if he is able to provide, then we have to find a way or a technology or something like that, change the design such a way that we are also meeting. If the competitor is not there, then we can relax a bit so that it's like a benchmarking, so to set the target based on benchmarking. Definitely there is a trade-off required to strike a right balance between the effort or the cost to the benefit that we get.
Yeah. And then it's also a difference between different type of processes, right? Because if you look kind of at production type of processes, which are driven by machines and which are maybe more predictable in a sense, or can be more predictable, compared to service type of processes, right, where it requires knowledge workers or human involvement in order to make a decision.
Absolutely. Yes. So that is where more automation, if you make it in the service industry also, the productivity improves, and then the efficiency also goes up.
Okay. Yeah. So the interesting part is because I see often this Six Sigma way of working is not very much implemented deeply into the service type of organizations, and then you can wonder, why is this the case? This is already kind of an interesting question.
Yes.
But what I see in practice is that it's also kind of challenging sometimes to have these Six Sigma kind of metrics as part of this service organization, because sometimes it's so unpredictable. But what I see is kind of a shift. So a lot of these companies are working on the digital transformation. They are implementing workflows. They are automating some parts of the processes, and in some cases completely. They call it STP type of driven processes without any human involvement. And I think then it's a machine-driven process, right? So then it should be within the limits of these Six Sigma specifications, right? Yeah.
Yes, that's true. I think that is what the technology drives, actually. That's why they get into the new technology is driven by this goal, how to meet the goal, kind of a thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and perhaps also it can be a way for process miners who are have already focused on the low-hanging fruits and have optimized their processes on a certain level, understanding their processes, and want to go a level deeper, right? Then taking this kind of statistical dimension can give you this deeper understanding of the process. So that could be a next step. And interesting.
Yeah. And even without having a target, right? So that was what I find really appealing. So if you don't have a target yet, you can have an opinion or something like that. But even without having an opinion, you are objectively saying, this is where you're at right now.
Yeah, actually, that is where if you don't have the goal, then we can do a process mining and come out with what is the most viable or the best possible, which is called process entitlement. And that process, and for example, one variant is performing at a very optimal way. That means we can bring in all the other variants to that best performing level. So that is where the entitlement and coming out with a target based on the entitlement, process entitlement, and then we can keep on improving the process.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the other way around again. Maybe we talked in the beginning how you are also having kind of a central role, working with all different types of processes and process managers. So, is there? I'm curious how maybe your experience is for a topic like quality, and also when you present statistical analysis like that, do you find sometimes that people perhaps don't have that much of an affinity for maybe statistics, or that it's hard for them to understand, or the communication aspect of your quality role?
Absolutely, Anna. That's a challenge. I would say for any company that I have seen, it's always, as soon as you start throwing in statistics, there is some, let me call it, I don't want to call it resistance, but misunderstanding. And I think there are definitely all companies, not all, but many companies do use already some level of statistics. If you look at, let me zoom back into the Eindhoven region, that's most easy in this case. Name all the big companies around Eindhoven, definitely the ones in the technology sector. They are using statistics for sure, but it tends to be somehow isolated or siloed within certain functions. So manufacturing environments, definitely they do capability measurements, CPKs whatsoever, for sure. What we try to do is take those concepts and elevate them to the whole quality management system, where also processes that actually were never looked at that perspective, as we showed now, all of a sudden came into the spotlight. So I think we managed to somehow combine two different worlds, or two worlds that so far have been kept or have been living in separate domains, and get to the results we have achieved. So yes, for sure there needs to be quite a lot of communication to get that message across and to show the benefits of the things we now saw in this session. Absolutely.
Yeah. Great.
So and the companies, the technology companies which you had in mind, are they actually kind of production companies, or
yeah,
are
also
service companies?
Both, I would say both, okay. But more production-oriented companies, I would say.
Yeah, because so my hypothesis would be that if I look at the service companies, I think most of them are involved in lean or adopting kind of lean methodology, and not even so much the Six Sigma methodology, but just for the last 10 years, right?
Yes.
And these production companies are doing this for more than 25 years, I think.
Yes, so but in a siloed way, I would say, really. They did it, sure. But in their manufacturing domains, not outside of these. And I definitely can't speak for all companies, but at least based on my experience, which goes back quite many years, I can say I have never seen companies who are operating this at the quality management system level in full.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Actually, that is where the Lean Six Sigma has come in. For example, Lean and Six Sigma combined together. You're saying like the service industry adopt Lean a lot, yes. At the same time, if they also add the data capability to the Lean, it'll be very powerful. And I've seen in my past experience, like where the Lean and Six Sigma are both combined together. Very simple thing. I have a Kaizen to improve the lead time or the time, the cycle time, overall cycle time. I want to improve it. So I have the data before and data after. If I just make a statistical comparison to show that the improvement is statistically significant, that's a big jump. Instead of just saying like, yeah, based on the perception, I say that, yeah, it has improved. The statistics shows that there is a significant improvement.
Yeah, exactly.
That's also an interesting example, right? So if we look at one of the process miners of the years, Joris, which has done a great use case of FACO, we can share it also after the meeting. But they had a lot of benefits in applying lean at first, because they had some big gains to make, right? So if there's still a lot of opportunity in the process to improve, then with these simple kind of lean principles, removing waste, mapping out the process, you can gain a lot, right?
Yes.
But eventually you are coming to an edge where you cannot find any great opportunities anymore with that method. So then you need to find something else in order to do so. And so you can either look at Six Sigma tools, right, which are more in the margin to look for statistical benefits or improvements, or you can look at process mining, where you can kind of combine both of them into one view. And that's also, I think what's happening, right? So if you are at the beginning of the maturity, then you can still make a lot of big gains with the simple methodologies, or more simple methodologies, or techniques from Lean. And then eventually you have to move towards the more statistical method, of course. Yeah.
Right. You're right about the example from yours. I think that's a really good fit here, and we will make sure to include that with the show notes. And I think the interesting thing there is that, they already did Lean and Six Sigma, and then process mining actually gave them this additional edge, right, of further improving. And one of the main reasons was related to what was Jan saying earlier, the communication aspect. So actually bringing in the people who are working in these different specialties and getting their domain knowledge and their input to get ideas for what can actually be done differently and how the process can be organized in a different way.
Yes.
So it's, Lean and Six Sigma and then process mining together. So that's really, I think, the winning combination here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that there was a question from Joshua about more background information about the CPK, but we are going to share that after the session, right?
Yeah. Let's do that. Yeah. I think. Yeah, we're running a little bit out of time. Is there any last words you want to share for the process miners who are watching this? Any tips or?
As far as I'm concerned, I want to thank Fluxicon in this case to provide the opportunity to share this learning. And it's also speaking for us and our experience. I think what we did is definitely not restricted to the usage we had in our company, which is Philips, but it's beneficial to any process, I would say. We looked at a loan process. I gave a few examples of processes where we used it for. So I want to go that far to say you can use it for any process, as long as you meet the requirements to do process mining, of course. So I would like to invite everyone who was in this session to also provide any feedback to us. And even if that would be offline, you can find us somehow
on the LinkedIn,
via LinkedIn or whatever, and we are happy to share any information and maybe also learn from experience from the audience, for sure. So we are a very open. We want to have an open network on this topic.
Great, excellent. Yeah, we appreciate that a lot. Muthu, you want to say something?
Yes. Thank you very much to both of you and for giving this opportunity to showcase our experience. And it's a learning. It's a platform for learning as well. For example, the feedback that we get from other people, it'll be a good learning for us. And Rudy, actually, I always contact him whenever I have a problem in doing kind of a thing. Always helpful. Thank you both for giving us this wonderful opportunity. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing this with our community. Yes. And it's great, right? So you have an idea, and then we get on a call, and first we will look through the analysis together to give each other some tips and tricks.
Yeah.
But then eventually you come up with a new idea, right? And you start to develop this idea, and you start to work it out. You start to explain, and then discuss it together. And it's that's great. That within these things we can develop things, and then being able to share this as well. So. Yeah.
That's exactly. Thanks. Thank you all for the session. Thank you both, Jan and Muthu, for sharing this and also for making this available as a template for the community. So that's it's really nice to be able to do things like that with the process mining community. And we will make sure to forward anyone who contacts us to you, and we will share your contact details also in the along with all the other links, so people can contact you directly. So this is the beginning of a conversation. Maybe we see each other all at the process mining camp. It's 21st of June this year. Mm-hmm. If you haven't marked your calendar yet, you should do that. I hope we see you there.
Sure, we'll do that.
Okay, well, thank you all.
And we will share the link for the podcast, right?
Yeah, for the podcast. Yeah, we will share
it. Very good.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. It brings us to the end of the session. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
We will be back in 6 weeks or something. Rudy and I will talk about data preparation. So there will be another process mining cafe soon. And until then, we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.